Welcome to another episode of Anatomy of the Climb, where we break down the anatomy
and technique
of various climbs submitted by you, our viewers.
Moonboards. So there's just a couple things here as far as sort of foot selection. She ends up doing these sequences really nicely and with a lot of control. But a lot of times experimenting with some slightly different foot positions or movement patterns can just kind of make things a little easier, a little smoother with repeats. And so you can kind of see as she's on this undercling here, it's generally nice to get as high above underclings as possible. You're generally more controlled when you're kind of extended into them. And so this foot in particular, I think would have been kind of nice to use. It's going to drive directly into this thing, so it gives you a really nice line of force, and ultimately it's where she's going to want her foot anyways for this next sequence. So kind of just minimizes extra actions and makes things a little nicer.
If you're pulling like a little more like up with it, then you're going to be pulling with the hold. And what do you say, Dan? Pull
Through the hold.
Pull through the hold. That's right.
It comes up constantly, man.
Yeah.
As we get higher up here, she gets matched. I think she's thinking with her sort of right foot whether she should sort of come up somewhere, and so sort of decides on this jump. But this left foot is in a really nice place. It's not really very far out of reach, and so potentially matching feet and bringing up that left foot would eliminate the need to jump to this kind of like pinch hold, which I think probably adds quite a bit of difficulty. Not only that, if she then had her left foot here instead of her right foot, she could easily step across with the right foot to the little jug dude, which would just kind of clean up this whole sequence. This would be less extended, she'd be a little bit square, and she'd be sort of in position to move over to the end. She's floating right around this right foot, and so there wouldn't really be much need for a change in body position to get a little bit more control and a little bit extra push to get across. So you see how she's kind of generating with like, kind of swinging her hips and sort of like pulling up over here. This would give her a little bit more kind of side to side direction, which is somewhat lacking from the rest of this position. And having it there would also make it easier to step up her foot. So instead of having to cut, she'd be a little bit taller if you just go like left foot onto this thing for the finishing match. Yeah. Anyways, might make life a little bit easier on a repeat attempt.
You don't need feet on the Moonboard, is what I've been told. Correct?
I don't think you're actually allowed to have them. You know, it's like an assisted.
I think when they set that one, they said at least 3 foot cuts are required, right?
Yeah. Harassment aside, he smashes it.
Yeah, it's great. Well done.
And the actual precision on the like the hand positions are really good. A lot of kind of interesting technique. I think a lot of climbers who get strong quickly, especially, at least briefly, sort of develop their own movement style and patterns, which, especially if they're climbing hard and climbing well, work for them and work even like pretty smoothly. You can see some funny examples of this if you go back and watch like West Coast Pimp or some of the early climbing videos. You see like Chris Sharma and all these guys with pretty unconventional movement styles at this point, but they're done with like a lot of sort of authority and smoothness, even if watching now you're like, what are you doing? You know, so it's just cool to see kind of how these sort of more like natural styles kind of arise. And so no real like corrections for any of that. The only thing here that I would sort of consider is for this move, when he hits this, instead of kind of staying controlled in the shoulder, I don't know if it was a strength thing or preference or what, but he just goes straight into this sort of like dangle, which suggests very adequately strong fingers for these holds, but it just doesn't let you control the movement super well, which is how you get like the start of this little sort of toilet bowl going on. It could just be like a style or preference or something, but the way certainly that he kind of falls out of this suggests to me like a little bit of a strength deficit relative to his fingers. Generally speaking, this isn't a way that you would move if it was just sort of a preference, you know? Like that looks like sort of a braking force, you know? at that joy.
Very happy ending.
Sick.
The part I liked here was when he does this kind of cross through. We look at the shoulder positioning, like we're in this kind of pull through here, and I'm just going to talk about the external rotators, but you know, they're going to be engaged in this position, but what's neat is the body change. So as he reaches through, that left shoulder relatively comes into this position, but he's still engaging those external rotators.
Right.
So I talk to people oftentimes about training external rotators in like various positions, but one that's missed sometimes, but is achieved by this exercise called like the no pyramids, is where you're fighting with the resistance band, so between the wrists here, so it's pulling you into that rotation here. So that's just a spot where you can see where having that training of the external rotators there is going to be beneficial.
So a lot of these things, people don't necessarily think about how certain planes of exercises translate to a climbing wall. So I could certainly imagine how people who haven't done this particular exercise before could be kind of thinking like, okay, well, like how does this carry over to climbing? Like I'm going to be out here, you know? And so it's really the same like as you start to twist, right? It's like you're still in this frontal plane, but just kind of lined up with the wall now. So do you personally prefer like a small loop band kind of pulling apart like this, or if you had like a shoulder, like a wall attachment, kind of just doing like one-sided kind of like reach ups? Have you had any like just either personal, you know, gut feel? What do you got?
I do, because I know there's so many things, and you know there's 17 muscles alone that attach to the shoulder blade of the shoulder. So there's a lot that you can train. So with that in mind, I like the 2-arm with the loop because it's twice as efficient.
That's fair. Yeah.
So, you know, other benefits, like are you going to get more like core activation, more single arm focus, so you can identify like deficits and whatnot doing it with one arm? Absolutely. But from an efficiency standpoint, I do tend to like that. Just like I don't like doing single arm rotation here. I prefer that because it takes half the time.
Just quicker. Yeah. That's fair. Okay.
So you don't always want that with everything, but there are times when I want to be more efficient.
Yeah. I don't have too much here. I mean, this is just like properly slaughtered, so what can I say?
Properly slaughtered.
yeah, humanely. I guess the two like tiny things that I notice is as he kind of jumps up here, he kind of gets a little upward rotation of the scapula as he controls this, and to some extent doesn't bother to reset it. You see kind of how right here it's kind of set down, but then as he kind of like starts to rock across the foot, the shoulder just kind of shoots up right there. So that's not ideal. I mean, if you have healthy shoulders and you're strong, sort of doesn't matter, but by having it elevated like that, you're gonna have a little bit less kind of clean of a pull through, and it's a little less stable, a little less safe. The other thing is like as you're up here, you end up with like trying to generate more with sort of a rotation, and as soon as you set, you're kind of into this like one arm sort of row position, which is just much stronger. It gets a lot of big muscles going, and it's just sort of smoother. So didn't cause him a shred of problem here, but something to keep an eye on in general. I'm super biased here because he was one of the first clients that came over from Hooper's Beta specifically. So he's been watching you guys for a bit, and I got the pleasure of working with him for a few months, and it's cool to see him smash this project. This is something he was working on a little while back when we were working together, and yeah, just rad to see the results.
Coaching with Dan, that's the way to go if you want to start smashing your projects. We'll as always have that information available to you guys. I seriously doubt he has any opening slots right now, but you never know. Maybe there's a wait list or something, huh?
A lot of times I'm available for some like kind of one-off calls.
Yeah.
So if you have like a list of questions that I can sort of like efficiently help you get through, it's a lot faster than trying to read a textbook or Googling things from questionable sources.
So this position is actually is really cool because he's actually quite like internally rotated, like with his shoulders. He's gonna get a lot actually of good like pec major involvement and also some subscap involvement, just because he's gonna create that downward pull through the hold. So it's kind of a neat point to emphasize that something has to counter that for your shoulders to stay stable, and that is going to be the external rotators, so the infraspinatus, the teres minor. And if you don't have good strength and stability and training in those, your humerus actually can suffer because the connecting structures, I should say, because the humerus is going to get pulled forward by that big pec major and the surrounding structure.
Right.
So you want to have that counter from the posterior muscles like the external rotators, because that's going to create that shoulder stability, help prevent injury. You know, face pulls are cool because they get you here, but you're usually still externally rotated.
Yeah.
Using a dumbbell and actually doing it more like an eccentric, like a scarecrow, they call it sometimes, and working that into that downward motion can be helpful because you're getting load on the external rotators right here, but in an internally rotated position.
Sure. I use this with some clients that need it, but a lot of times it is a little more effort and time consuming than is necessary for everybody. But I think that it builds some like really phenomenal shoulder strength in some practical ways. But one of its kind of sneaky side benefits is that, especially if you start light enough, as you always should, you can use it as a cue to find when your scapula needs to start rising to kind of make room here. And light pinching will cue well when things are out of position. And so as you kind of find it, it lets you kind of keep tension and engagement through the external rotators as you get into what would be kind of classically thought of as a more kind of risky position. And then you can kind of get a sense of how to kind of keep things tight and engage back out of it. So that whole range works really well, and it gets to the point where you can kind of just like rip holds off of the wall, which is, after all, the objective.
I don't have really that much to say, Dan.
Yeah, it looked cool, but like, you know, can't quite see what's going on. Just looks like a super cool, like, sort of roof. Oh, where did you come from?
What's up, guys?
Okay.
Hey, so I have a question on this one.
Yeah.
People always say that they suck at cave if their core is weak, and to solve that, they always just go do a bunch of sit-ups. And is that really what you want to do for cave climbing and core training? Let me know.
Before I answer that,
Bye.
go back to your hole. So that's honestly like a great question and very applicable for us to talk about in this. So what is the crunch working really, like, or a sit-up? That's really focusing on your rectus abdominis, which is the six-pack muscle, right? That's when everyone wants to train because it looks the best. It's also not the most functional. It's helpful for like pulling you forward, for preventing you from falling backwards, and from helping to tilt your pelvis. So the feet, just the weight of his feet, are gonna want to tilt his pelvis posteriorly, okay? The role of the core, the rectus abdominis, is to prevent that, to create that anterior tilt. So in that sense, sure, it's beneficial. But really, the core in this sense is the posterior chain, okay?
Right.
The hamstring, the calf, so like the gastrocsoleus, going into even some of the back muscles, and then into the scapular retractors, and translating that force to your hand. So yeah, the core needs to be viewed more as this entire like unit, because the force is still being translated from foot to hand. So it has to go through something, your core.
It seems like in a lot of cases with functional steep climbing, most people trying to do that are probably not held back by the abdominal muscles in particular. So given that, they seem to have the experience of having a hard time keeping their feet on. So if they feel strong on the hands, and the supposition is that their abs are not what's holding them back, you know, they're already beach ready, you know. Is there anything that you just kind of spot or see with kind of cave climbing in general that is likely to be either a weaker muscle or in a weaker position?
There's one major factor I'll get to, but you often see it a lot with weakness in like this extended position for the leg. So like the hamstring in that like more straight leg position as you're like getting further and further extended. But the reality is when a lot of people get extended and they have like one good leg on and they have the opposite hand, they can't transfer that force well from foot to hand. because they don't actually have good awareness of the body positioning, maybe with the back still, like pulling through, but transferring through like the obliques or bracing through that deep core, the transverse abdominis. So they lose it somewhere, whether it's a failure in the core, so then they all of a sudden are sitting back rather than being able to stay stable, or they just can't engage all three at the same time, keeping the foot tight with the hamstring while engaging like the butt and the obliques, and then keeping that tension through here. So it's not that they don't have strength in all of those body parts, it's that they don't have the awareness and the training to engage them all at the same time. Because oftentimes what will happen is the moment they make that move, they lose the core awareness, they lose that core engagement, and so then they have like a little moment where they drop because they're not pulling with that deeper core.
Sure. You see a lot of times with sort of newer climbers, when they go, they're like nice and stable in their position, their feet are set, but as they go to do a hand move, they're so focused on the way that they're generating to the hand and like trying to hit it precisely that they stop being able to pay attention to sort of what their lower body and feet are doing. And so very often you'll see people in relatively stable positions go for kind of a big hand move and immediately have their feet cut.
Should you do crunches to make yourself better at cave climbing? No. Should you work on more like body tension, the posterior chain, and making sure you have good awareness of your deep core and your obliques while engaging other body parts? Absolutely.
People don't do enough front levers.
Take me through the trauma.
No, this is actually a cueing thing, which is kind of nice. He's pretty engaged here. He's locked in on the shoulder. He's kind of anchored on this this sort of crimp thing. He's set up here. His foot's on. Great. But as he kind of cuts, you kind of watch everything just sort of open up. His scapula kind of rotate up. We use these a lot, not because one needs to be like obsessed with scapula, but they're just visually apparent, and so it's something that is frequently insightful to movements. Anyways, that's just because people get in all kinds of arguments about how important scapular form is. They're useful, deal with it. People end up in this position, and he's essentially trying to just kind of like either swing or kind of L-sit his foot back on, and he doesn't have a good way of controlling his motion here, right? So at this point, you're disconnected from sort of your kind of back muscles, your lower core, all these things that we talked about sort of with the roof video, right? So at this point, you're not really trying to control your legs because you're too far away to get on with an L-sit. And so what you have to do is kind of like lever your body back on. This is a lot easier than a front lever, which is a kind of common training technique for this. But at the same time, I'm gonna just stand and gesture again. It's just how it's gonna be. When I'm like this and I'm trying to kind of like lean around, I don't have a good way of controlling things. And so if you just kind of consciously like scoop with your chest, all of a sudden you can reach much, much further without really using too much more force. And so what really should be done here is like using sort of the row hand. He wants to pull in and kind of pin with his scapula to kind of direct his body. So you'll see this in like easy drills. You can do it on a moonboard, you can do it on the wall, but like just kind of hang and try to reach out side to side with your feet. And you'll find that as you kind of rotate towards that hand and kind of make a sort of proud chest and think about kind of that sort of scoop back arc kind of feel, all of a sudden, without particularly engaging sort of your abs or even other kind of pulling muscles much more, you'll be able to reach and extend a lot further. And so this happens quite a bit with steep climbing. It's like often the culprit for why people can't get their feet back on. And it's something that, while it would benefit from strength training in some ways, just a little practice and a little cueing goes a really long way quite quickly.
So you're saying I had to practice? I can't just do sit-ups?
I mean, you can.
I can. Here you go. Sit-ups.
Yeah, sit-ups.
Let's go.
Come on. Nice. Yep, come on. Big, big, big. Nice.
So right off the bat, like this first pretty shouldery move, right? If he was here and pulling down, it would be pulling down more into internal rotation, but he's kind of almost like in a Gaston to start on that. So he's putting a lot of stress on the posterior shoulder. You still want good scapular strength in that position, but strength of the external rotators and the posterior delt in that position are gonna help to stabilize the shoulder a little more, so you can do that without suffering injury.
We like that. Not suffering injury is the way to go.
It's the way to go.
He manages to stay in like a nice, like sort of downwardly rotated position there too. A lot of people seem to rise up a little bit as they get into this, and so kind of as you're pointing out, like kind of staying square and set on that is really kind of nice.
Yeah, you're right. Because as you're internally rotated, and then if you let it rise up, that's kind of a classic kind of impingy position.
I talk to a lot of clients about this kind of stuff. Trying to throw your body sort of into the position that you want to end in, So he slightly overshoots, like he doesn't hit this at like totally full extension. He throws himself into a nice line. So it's like he starts to get his hand on it here, but where his body ends up, boop, you see how he's kind of like a little bit more balanced in between this. It gets him just like a little set in the shoulder, a little bit of bend in the elbow. And one of the things I look for as far as just like ending up where you meant to, you can see that there's virtually no additional swing here. Bop. See, like no swing out in correction, like it's really pretty well aimed. And what little extra momentum he kind of had is nicely canceled by this little leg kick. See, so he has a nice way of sort of like dispersing extra force. So basically that's just really prettily done, pretty canonical.
Yeah, well done.
If I were to nitpick a little bit, which is what I do, he could probably stand to be just a little bit taller, by which I mean like you can see that his left foot is still a little bit bent. So that suggests that his hips have come out from the wall some, which is gonna just not allow him to put as much weight on the foot as possible. And additionally, by being somewhat lower set, he's gonna be loading the shoulder a little bit more than he needs to. So if he did basically this exact thing, but kind of aimed to have his face maybe like kind of up here a little bit more, so small shift, he'd be able to take a little bit more advantage of his height, he'd be able to suck his hips into the wall just a little bit more, and he'd be a little bit less extended on that shoulder. So
yeah, he'd be, instead of like out here, he'd be a little more
just a little bit, it's like this versus like
Yeah.
kind of just being a little taller, a little more into it. So small note, really prettily done.
The thing I also like about this foot as he goes through it is this pull. He actually, because he rotates and he's still leaning, he actually has a lot of load to his adductors in this position.
Yep.
I don't know if you're familiar with like the Copenhagen plank, which is an adductor plank.
Not by that name.
But I actually like that as a training tip for people.
Okay.
Because you're getting that straight leg position, you're getting the adductors worked while also engaging the obliques, which is exactly what you need.
Right. The other thing is you'll see a lot of times people kind of out of habit go into sort of more of a drop knee here. So I've never known quite what to call this, quarter drop knee. But there's a number of these things where you want to keep a relatively straight leg while still rotating the hips. This gets you kind of a nice middle ground where you're able to still press into the foot super hard, but you don't rotate your foot so much that you're unable to sort of like pull through it at the same time. So this kind of position, when it's available, will frequently let you get quite extended while also giving you a lot of the benefits of both a square position and a drop knee. It's sort of the half crimp of the hip positions. He does suffer just a little bit from the shoulder kind of rising here. It's not a ton, it's not like anything that would be particularly worrisome from like an injuriousness perspective, but by making sure to have that really set, it'll just let you kind of pack that box a little tighter and get even more sort of drive directly through that line. So it's a really nice, straight, strong line when the move allows it. But you really want to focus on like getting into the shoulder sort of as much as possible in these positions.
So this is the part I wanted to talk about, and just the importance of overhead shoulder stability. We oftentimes neglect that, like training in these overhead positions with scapular retraction, but sometimes not. Sometimes people do like a basic Y exercise, but I like doing more movements. So say like the face pull where you add in that overhead press, or even just a single arm motion where you create that overhead and come back down, or even doing like oscillations in this overhead, because he's gonna quickly load that arm and you can see it like extend. He grabs it, but then he just drops. He drops into it and like is fully loaded into that right arm now. And in that position, it's gonna create a lot of
shocklets and things.
Yeah, with the other shots, you could see better shoulder and mid-back engagement, and he doesn't have it here. So that to me, if I was watching this, is is an opportunity for improvement to make sure we don't get injured in those positions.
Yeah, yeah. Because I guess the combination of like you lose some of the tone that was there in the other shots, which suggests a little lack of muscle engagement, along with sort of that extension, and not a ton, but a little bit of upward rotation. So, you know, no reason to expect this to be necessarily injurious or anything, but it's like clearly exposed.
But over like, you know, multiple exposures to it, like especially if this was like he's working on this as his project, and he kept doing that, and
you know, 10 or 20
like,
tries.
Why does my shoulder feel sore? You know, that would be why. Or if it was like, way later, end of the session, totally blew off and loaded in that way, you can definitely, you know, suffer a larger injury, like a partial tear of something in that regard.
Just a tiny thing. I liked how he took advantage of this momentum to just kind of like swing across onto the foot. That's a nice kind of like connection of that. But you can tell he has rather more momentum as he kind of overswings here than is strictly necessary. That can be mitigated. Like once you get here, you can kind of switch your drop knee to the other direction, which is going to let you kind of keep tension, shift your hips across, and then just sort of step off onto this foot. On these holds, they're relatively large, so the cost is not so great. But on smaller holds, even if you're able to control them well, you're going to suffer some amount of skin damage and sliding and things, and so it's just a little inefficient. This, he's just standing down too much on the foot, so he's trying to push along the board. With things like this, you really want to drop your heel and think about pressing directly into the board. So it's a useful push foot, but this kind of thing you can do against like paint on the board, whatever. It just takes a little bit of getting used to how you sort of effectively generate into a flat, slopey, or disfavorable surface. So I think that could take a little bit of practice, but it still gets him where he's going, so it doesn't really matter. The last thing that I wanted to touch on, just because I think it happens with some regularity with people, is as he kind of surges out here, bop, you see how he kind of like swings a bit to the right.
Yeah.
So it's well controlled, and again, it's like doesn't cause him any problem, but in general, sort of easy rule of thumb, it's not by any sense hard and fast or universal, but like you kind of want to avoid being too bent. Kind of the straighter you can stay, the easier it's going to be to apply force onto things. You're essentially just a less complex system. There's less levers at play. There's better transmission of forces to things. It's just better, mostly. You know, enough times you do want to like get a high foot or something, but you generally want to get out of those positions as kind of quickly as convenient. But the bigger thing is when he kind of generates across here, he sort of leads with his face, which is kind of how these things happen. You know, you see where you're going, you're kind of just like going along this path. It's generating nicely between his hands, but it sort of leaves his bottom half behind. This would just be a somewhat smoother experience if he kind of, his hips are gonna come up, but then if he brought them sort of with him. So he starts to go across, but it's like really, I think, for this to be sort of optimal, he would like his body to be kind of like here, which would put his knee kind of over there and his hips kind of, you know. So just shift a little bit to the left. It's gonna be a more balanced, softer, gentler, more efficient position. And by and large, like using your knee to kind of cue your hip movement is frequently useful.
So in summary, climbing is hard. So he's now, like, as he's pulling through that left hand, in order to stay in that position, he's actually pulling and creating like tricep or elbow extension.
Yeah.
So he's actually also using his tricep in that position.
Yeah, we think of it so much as a push muscle, but it's used like quite necessarily in pulling type climbing movements.
Yeah.
Just a quick note, I just kind of liked how he kind of quickly came from, you have this position that's pretty tenuous, you know, it's taking a lot of force to get through here and you're getting into like weaker and weaker positions muscularly, but he quickly and smoothly just transitions back into that plumb line, so just nicely done. So a lot of times I'll look and just sort of assume that people tend to not drive far enough across on the knee, and so he braps across pretty nicely here, hits it really nicely, kind of at extension, which sort of hints that he's aiming sort of with his hand rather than with his body, which is how most people do it, so it's fine. But now that I'm sort of like looking at this, it occurs to me like this might be a slightly easier catch if he's over just a little further, so he's not so extended on that shoulder. However, once you start looking at that, you see this thumb ditch out on the last move. Could be a lack of bench strength, more likely than that. It's just not his preferred kind of typical grip. But even more than that, as I'm considering him not being far enough to the right, I'm looking at the way that he's engaging this hand. Because the thumb comes off, it means that he's not pulling through it to the right and using it as a pinch, which means that he's essentially down pulling, which we can kind of see through the forearm and elbow here. So this hold is just big enough and flat enough that he's able to pull through it as a down pull, and it works pretty smoothly. But those are essentially all cues that you're not getting as much out of it as you could. And so if he were to try to kind of generate a little bit more to the right with his chest, drive a little further with the knee, that's gonna pull the hips across, get his line over to the right a little bit more as a whole. That's gonna let him use this as a side pull a little bit more, and being in more of a side pull position, he's gonna be able to take more advantage of using it as a pinch. That's a lot, but you kind of just watch for little things. You know, it's like as soon as you start realizing that you're not kind of like taking full advantage of a hold, there's at least some question as to why.
If you guys like this video, we'll be able to do more of them, and that means we get to review more of your climbs. We got so many submissions, there's just no way we could get through them all, but if you guys show us you like these videos, hopefully we'll be able to get through more and feature you guys on this channel.
Like, subscribe, and email.